Welcome to Triangle Skeptics in the actual real-life pub for March 19, 2025. We have a fantastic treat of a speaker tonight. This is John Michael, everybody. He's our speaker this evening.
Hello.
John is an investigator of paranormal claims who helps believers examine alleged supernatural phenomena through scientific methodology. Drawing from his background in philosophy and his current role as a server engineer, he deconstructs popular ghost hunting practices based on his experience with the North American Paranormal Society and Ghost Guild. His journey from believer to skeptic, including investigations at abandoned sites along the East Coast, uniquely positions him to promote skepticism and scientific reasoning within the paranormal community. So John's going to give us a great talk tonight about ghost hunting for skeptics. This will be sort of an introduction for those who are trying to get a foothold on where ghost hunters come from. And without further ado, John Michael, everybody.
Yay. So I'm John. I wanted to start off talking about who I am. And this is going to be kind of longer than what I normally do, but because you're kind of my people, and this is my group, I kind of wanted to say hello and kind of give you a presentation for who I am as a human being. So this is going to be a little bit longer than normal. But I'm just curious before we start, though, because I always like to ask. This is actually my first presentation I've ever given to skeptics. Yeah, I'm used to like talking to other ghost hunters or like in a mixed group. So it's weird. You would think I'd be more comfortable, and I'm not. Like I'm actually, it's weird. I'd rather talk to people of different beliefs than but that's okay. Oh, man. Also, but yeah, I just want to start off with a quick question, and you don't have to answer if you're not comfortable answering. But who in here believes in ghosts? I'm just curious. Okay. You do? Awesome. Abraham? Awesome. Is there anybody in here who does not believe in ghosts?
I want to.
Okay.
It'd be really cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. Is there anyone who's not sure? Like kind of like in between? In between? Okay. Cool. Always gives me a good idea of where I want to go with the presentations. That's why I was asking. Cool. Well, everybody is welcome, so I'm glad everyone showed up for this. But I'm John. So another question I'm always curious about, who was actually born in North Carolina? Hey, we're rare, man. We are so rare. It's crazy.
I've been here since I was 3, so.
Yeah, doesn't count. Wow. Okay.
So I consider those born here actual ghosts.
It's a good one. Yeah, there's not many of us. It's so strange. Everyone either moves out of North Carolina or moves to North Carolina. But I was born in Greensboro, in a town called Summerfield. I was raised by my grandparents. My mother was 15 when she had me, so she gave me over to my grandparents. So I actually was raised in an extremely, and I use that word not lightheartedly, an extremely religious family. My grandmother was an independent Baptist, and she actually believed one of the most right-wing, fundamentalist, mainstream denominations today is the Southern Baptist Convention. She thought they were a bunch of liberals. That's how right, like out there she is in terms of beliefs. My grandfather actually went to a I think it's an archaic Baptist church. They believed in not having electricity because Jesus didn't have electricity in his day. So his church was actually they didn't have electricity, running water, or anything. It was okay for it to be in the home, just not at church. That's the environment I grew up in. But one thing that my grandma did that even some other families who have different belief systems don't do is she really wanted me to have an education. She really wanted me to have an open mind. And one of the things I cannot thank her enough for is she encouraged me to learn how to think for myself. And I appreciate that. I didn't wind up in the same beliefs that she did, but I think she's okay with that. So one of the things that she used to do was take me to a library. And I do not know why. To this day, I don't know why. There are 3 kinds of books I checked out. Books on witchcraft, books on ghosts, and books on aliens. I don't know. I was like a 10-year-old kid reading about this stuff. And my very conservative grandmother was totally cool with it. The church would preach, hellfire damnation, but letting her grandchild check out books on witchcraft. I appreciated it, though. But from there, I felt like I was called from the Lord at the age of 15 to be a pastor. And I went to a seminary. I went to Southeastern College at Wake Forest, which is also Southeastern Seminary at Wake Forest. And I have never left the Raleigh area. I went to seminary up here in Wake Forest. And interestingly enough, same situation, was a Southern Baptist seminary, but they really, yes, they taught religion. I got a degree in history of ideas with religious studies. And history of ideas program is like a great books program. You learn critical thinking, but you read the original authors. Like I read Aristotle, I read Plato, and I read the original works. We actually had to learn German in order to read Immanuel Kant. Crazy, don't remember any of it, so don't ask me anything about languages, because I don't remember. It's horrible. And yeah, Critique of Pure Reason to this day is the hardest book I've ever read. I like Kant, but yeah. Anyways, another time, another place. But that school, seminary, taught me how to think, actually learn critical thinking at a seminary, which I know some people may not think you would learn that. But in the Great Books program, it wasn't so much the seminary teaching me as much as it was those philosophers of the old days. And I really came out of that. I did not graduate for a variety of reasons. But from seminary, I kind of didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And it was right around the time of the Great Recession. I was working door-to-door sales for Time Warner Cable, which, yes, is any kind of hell you can imagine. I actually that's how I met Nick. I applied, I was just curious. It was the Great Recession. I didn't have a job. I lost my job from Time Warner Cable. That's how bad it was when cable sales are starting to lay people off. But I applied, or I was looking around online because I was always interested in ghosts. It was just something that piqued my curiosity. I think part of it was because of how I was just nervous about death. But from there, I was curious about, it was just, ghosts was always something I've been curious about, mostly, I guess it's just that question of is there life after death? I mean, I explored that in seminary. When you're starting to move away from religion, it's one of the things that stays in the back of your mind, what's gonna happen to me when I die? And I found these guys. I don't remember how I found NAPS, the North American Paranormal Society. Yeah, I don't know how I found the email. I still don't remember. But I emailed the North American Paranormal Society. That's where I met Nick at a CC's. And joined that team. And I know, Nick, you've come a long way since that point, too. But that's how I got into ghost hunting with North American Paranormal Society. Nick and I eventually left, kind of did our own thing. It's actually during that experience, the in-between two different teams, where I kind of started to become skeptical. Nick and several other people always talked about this one particular place. And you may have heard, I think I heard you're a ghost hunter in Ohio. Okay, cool. Oh, I apologize.
I am from Ohio.
I thought I heard you used to do it or something. I apologize. Ohio State Reformatory up in Mansfield. Shawshank Redemption, yeah. Everyone has always talked about how this is the most haunted place ever. And I had never experienced anything. Nothing had ever happened to me in years of doing this. And I was like, OSPH, or OSH, this prison is going to be the place. I'm going to see a ghost. It's going to happen. This place is super haunted. And as we went to the prison, I was excited. We had just talked about it all the time. It was the one place I just always wanted to go. And so we drove all the way up to Ohio. There's something you have to know about paranormal investigations. One, you have to pay for most of the public investigations. They're usually around $100 a person, give or take. You have to drive really far. How far away is Mansfield?
9 hours.
Yeah, a 9-hour drive. It was a long drive. You have to pay for places to sleep. Of course, we stay at your aunt's, which was nice. But oftentimes you have to get Airbnb, hotel, or anything else. There's a lot of expense required in ghost hunting, which you don't see on TV. But I had paid a lot of money over a long stretch of time. And I knew this was it. I'm going to the most haunted place ever. It's a prison, seeing some ghosts. And as usual, nothing. There was just absolutely nothing. And I think we had 2 places left for the night. And the second to last place was supposedly the most haunted place in the entire place. And that was the solitary confinement. where you'd sent all the terrible, awful people who were doing all sorts of things. Just claims out the wazoo about this place. I'd seen some video about weird things happening. And I went, and nothing happened. Absolutely quiet. The person I was with was seeing everything, but I never, yeah, he would say, like, I see a girl standing there. I'm like, I don't see it. But yeah, I didn't see anything. And so I remember we went to the next place. I don't remember, it was just some kind of hallway. And I was sitting on a beam, and I just so sad. Like, I've spent so much money for so long, driven so far, and just nothing was happening. And that's when I thought I saw Nick walking out. And I was like, oh, like, there's Nick. And then I kind of sat there, and I was like, oh, that's not Nick. I looked over at the person I was sitting next to, Aaron. I said, Aaron, do you see Nick? Is that someone walking up? And Aaron at first didn't see anything. He's like, nah, I don't see anything. I see someone walking like towards us in the dark, because every investigation's done in the dark, by the way. And I see someone walking up to me in the dark. And all of a sudden, Aaron just stopped. He's like, yeah, I see it. It looks like the person's like checking the cells. I'm like, oh yeah, the person's checking the cells. And then we got excited. We're seeing a ghost. We're seeing a warden or someone checking the cells. And I was like, this is it? Like, I finally saw something. We're running into you guys. Like, we were so excited because we had finally saw a ghost. And the next, like, it just didn't sit with me. Something about that experience just didn't sit with me. And I didn't figure it out until probably like a year later. But even on the way home, and I hope it's okay if I say this, I didn't ask for your permission, but you were actually kind of getting mad at me because I was thinking, like, did I really see something? And it's probably more of a frustration because you were like, you did or you didn't? And I was like, I don't know what I saw. I'm not entirely sure, because the more I thought about it, Aaron was the one who was kind of describing what was going on, and it was like causing me to see something. A couple of years later, I finally got it. I didn't see anything. It was just, this happens where you feed off of each other and you can literally see stuff with your eyes, but nothing is going on. And it hit me just a couple of years later, and that really sent me down the path of skepticism. Just watching just the pressure involved to see these things. And that's how I became a skeptic. Like, going to the most haunted place in the world, or in the East Coast of the United States, supposedly, is what led me down to the path of skepticism. So that's who I am. That's my quick and short story, probably a long story. This is why I like to do what I do now. I like to still interact with other ghost hunters and paranormal investigators. In general, don't call a ghost hunter a ghost hunter. They do not like the term. It has kind of become a derogatory term over time. They much prefer paranormal investigator, but it depends on who you talk to. That's who I am. I later joined the Ghost Guild as a skeptic at that point, like a full-blown skeptic, trying to help them out because they really wanted to take a different path. I am no longer with that team, and I'm kind of doing my own thing now. But I wanted to start off with just talking about what paranormal investigation is. As a history of ideas major, where we always would do like critical intellectual history, it's always important for me to talk to other people about the history of something. So I think it makes sense when you know where something came from, helps you kind of understand what it is today. So I'd like to talk about history of paranormal investigation. And you don't have a choice because you're here, so you got to listen to what I say. But this started, and I hope you all can see this. Ghosts have been reported since man could write, and probably before that. But not a lot of people investigated ghosts. It was just kind of something that was accepted. It was just part of culture, and no one really questioned it. In the Victorian times, there's actually news articles where people would see dogs, like a white dog walking down the street, and people would just, like, it would, literally in the news article, it would say a ghost of a dog was walking down the street. They just accepted that the white dog was a ghost. That's just how much ghosts have just been part of people's lives, up until about the 1840s when things began to change. And this is where all these are my own labels. These are not official, but it's just what I have decided to label them. But around the 1840s, I think specifically like in 1848, starting with the Fox sisters, This is where paranormal investigation really takes off. If you've ever seen like the old-timey Victorian images of people doing seances and things like that, that's what was going on all throughout the middle of the 1800s. And the Fox sisters specifically are responsible for this. From my researching from it, there is no real historical basis for why the Fox sisters decided to do these things. It kind of seems like they made it up. I'm sure they were influenced by something, but as far as I can tell, I don't see any cultural significance for why the Fox sisters decided to do a lot of the things that they wanted, like they wanted to do with spiritualism and mediums. But in this era, especially the Romantic era, very little critical thinking during this era. It was all about feelings and just what you experienced. And you will see this stay within. This never leaves paranormal investigation. This very much is at the core of what most paranormal teams, not all, but what most paranormal teams are after. They're still chasing these things. They're still chasing automatic writing. They're still chasing experiences and things like that. They say they aren't. They may say they're being scientific. They're not. During this time period, spiritualism really became an industry. That's where you get Ouija boards. Ouija boards come from this era. Literally, companies were selling, and companies sell stuff today, but major manufacturing companies were selling things to people in order to investigate ghosts. That's just how popular ghosts, it wasn't really called ghost hunting back then, but that's just how popular spiritualism was. Spiritualism eventually became a religion, which actually was really interesting. Researching this particular presentation, I didn't realize that spiritualism still exists. There are actually still spiritualist churches. There's one, I think, in Richmond that you can still go to that's just like the old churches from the 1850s and 60s, where they'll do table tipping and all sorts of interesting things. But as with, again, we don't have a great start. During this period, just fraud is everywhere. Some of the most famous pictures you'll see is these ectoplasm pictures. It was right at the dawn of pictures, so people didn't quite understand how photography worked. And they would take, of course, tissue and things like that and make it look like you're vomiting ectoplasm, or there would be ectoplasm behind you. And people didn't know what they were looking at. They thought they were taking pictures of real life. And so people that knew better were taking advantage of that and saying they were capturing spirits and ectoplasm and things like that. But of course, later on, we know how they did it. Unfortunately, that's not what was going on. Would have been cool. You have a couple of organizations that try their best to be scientific. They don't do a great job of it, but I'll give them a shot for trying. The Society for Psychical Research actually still exists as well. They're really huge in the UK. They started really trying to debunk a lot of these spiritualist mediums. And they would later, actually, Nick, if you want to go next, they are one of the leading forces behind the next era. But I wanted to talk about the Fox sisters real quick, just because these three are the reason ghost hunting exists. Their version of ghost hunting does not look like anything you will ever probably see, but they started it. And they also kind of made it all up. We can't tell where they got it from. But these three are very famous for creating the idea of a seance where everyone turns off the lights, you sit in a circle, maybe you would hold hands, light candles, ask if any spirits are in the room. Today, a lot of ghost hunters, I would say practically all of them, do what's called EVP sessions. Basically, it's question and answer sessions where they'll ask, is anyone here? They're the ones that invented it. They came up with the idea of asking if spirits are here, can you make a sound? They call it rapping back in the day, not like Snoop Dogg rapping, like our boy in the corner over here, but it was more like just knocks. They might say, if you're here, make a knock. Oh, someone's here. That's where this comes from, these three. Unfortunately, and ghost hunting doesn't get a great start, they were later exposed as frauds, and they actually admitted to creating the sounds themselves. So it's not a great start when your kind of three patrons of ghost hunting come out to be frauds. Next. So starting in around the 1900s, out into about the 1960s, you would see kind of a rise of pseudoscience. Pseudoscience is something that looks like science, but is very much not science. Pseudoscience tends to confirm your biases instead of being objective. It is a very subjective thing, and it looks like science, but really all you're doing is confirming your own biases half the time. This really marked a shift, especially when the Fox sisters were portrayed to be not real, like faking everything. The spiritualism just collapsed, and it moved towards, it is a sweet bike. It moved towards a more critical and scientific approach. And I put that in quotes because it definitely was more critical, but you couldn't have got much less critical. And so it's in the right direction, but it's not all the way there. One of the big problems, and again, this continues to this day, is that investigations lacked any kind of serious scientific controls. There was just, again, rampant fraud, rampant fakery. A lot of people would do an investigation and they would fall to self-deception because they wanted to believe in ghosts, and they would walk away with all the evidence in the world that ghosts existed. Two of the gigantic figures, not the most gigantic, as I'd like to talk about him next, but two of the big dogs in this era. One is a guy named Harry Price, and you will hear a lot of people, sometimes even some skeptics, will talk positively about Harry Price. But he is very similar to the Fox sisters, in that later he was discovered just making stuff up, to be honest, and got in trouble for committing fraud as well. He often tries to debunk things, unless if he wants them to be true, and all of a sudden he can find all the evidence in the world for the claim. But you'll hear a lot of people, even amongst more intellectual circles, talk positive about Harry Price. I think he's an overall net negative, unfortunately. Then there's Mr. Harry Houdini. A lot of believers in the paranormal want to claim Harry Houdini. Harry Houdini was very much a skeptic, did not believe in ghosts. He actually worked hard. He is probably the first person, at least that I can find in my records, who was purely a skeptic, who tried to find the truth. Like, he was very open to ghosts. He really wanted them to exist, but he never found any evidence of it, and so therefore he never believed in them. But he actively attempted to debunk, especially like ghost hunters, but especially psychic things, which I'm not going to touch on too much in this particular presentation. But I really wanted to talk about J.B. Rhine, and one of the main reasons is because he's actually from right down the road, from Duke. And again, you will hear a lot of people talk very positively about Mr. Rhine, and I think he did stuff better than most people of the era, but he really pioneered what is called parapsychology. And you'll hear this term a lot. Parapsychology sounds good, it sounds scientific. And this may be a hot take for some people in the paranormal community, but I think it's very much still a pseudoscience. In my brief run-ins with parapsychologists, they do the same thing as Harry Price, where if they really want to believe something, it's just all of a sudden they can find all the evidence in the world to confirm that belief. They do a really good job of using the scientific method to disprove stuff that they don't want to believe in. And they'll write and submit just great, like 40, 50, 60 plus page papers, citations all in them into parapsychology journals, talking about how ghosts can't be external of the human body, and just great stuff. But in the same paper, just praise ESP and praise other kinds of telepathy and things like that with zero evidence. It's bizarre to me. But later on, Duke University, he actually founded the Rhine Research Center at Duke University. Mr. James Randi actually is largely, well, not, I wouldn't say completely responsible, but James Randi actually helped Duke with an investigation to show that he would often just leave out a lot of citations when it came to a lot of his research, where he would actually confirm his own biases. Duke actually severed their contract, and he went across the street, literally across the street, bought the building, a new building, and called it the Rhine Research Center. And that is right down the road. I think Lloyd Auerbach is the current president of the Rhine Research Center. He tried, but I think he still missed the mark when it came to being objective about paranormal claims. And again, my terms, but I call this the modern pre-TV age. And what I mean by that is ghost shows. I couldn't come up with a better term. But you really start to see in this era the use of technology. And this comes full circle back to today. You start to see people use EMF meters, audio recorders, video equipment. The parapsychologists really start doing lab experiments at this point. The problem is that a lot of people will use this equipment and they just won't talk about why they're using it. Like, why are you using EMF meters? Do ghosts give off electromagnetic frequency? Why? Like, why does that happen? No one talks about the why. No one talks about, like, why are ghosts picked up by audio recorders? No one actually talks about that. Yeah, one of the big problems of this era is just people use stuff, but they don't actually talk about why they're using it. And they don't test it, they just start using it. A lot of anecdotal evidence really occurs at this point. This is really where the paranormal investigation that we're familiar with, that you may see on TV, really starts to develop. But as this style develops, at least the parapsychologists try to explain why they do stuff. These kinds of investigators do not. It's very much we use this equipment, but without a clear explanation to why. You may have heard of the Warrens. There's several movies made about them. They were huge in this period. They kind of took the more spiritualist side of things and the demonologist side. They're highly influential, but no one really does what they do. So I don't really understand why they're influential, but a lot of people will reference them. They did all sorts of exorcisms and rituals, and time again, they have just been proven to unfortunately be fraudulent. So I'm not gonna talk about them too much, but hopefully we all know, and if you don't, please look up James Randi, a wonderful human being. He really kicked in this era very hard. And I really want another James Randi to come around. Like, we need a skeptic who is just able to speak like he spoke and to connect with other human beings like he did. And we don't have anyone like that around. I don't think so anyways. Maybe we do. Maybe I'm being overly critical. But James Randi was a force in this era. Like I said, he was one of the reasons why the Ryan Research Institution was canceled its funding. Just a giant of a skeptic during this era. But there's one person I wanted to talk about. If you can go next. This person doesn't get talked about. Someone didn't update this. Maybe I'm gonna fire him. This is Konstantin Raudova. You don't hear this name very often, but I think this is like the single most influential person to modern paranormal investigation. He pioneered the idea of EVPs, that's electronic voice phenomena. It's the idea that ghosts are able to communicate with voice recorders, like they can actually talk on voice recorders, and you can later go back and listen to them and actually hear the voices in the voice recorder. He got this idea from a lady who went out bird hunting one day. And I think she left her recorder out for several, hours. It was a long time. And the part about the story I don't understand is that I didn't know they had recorders that could last that long back in the day, but I guess they could. So I've always wanted to double check that. But she went out bird hunting and she wanted to record the birds so she could later identify the birds that were in the forest. And when she listened to the recording, there were voices on the recording. And she surmised that there were ghosts in the forest. I don't know how she came to that conclusion. I don't know why she didn't think maybe there weren't people just walking around in the forest, but that was her conclusion. From there, another gentleman whose name is escaping me right now wrote a book called Voices from Space, where he later came up with the idea that ghosts could communicate through electromagnetic frequencies, but didn't give a reason as to why. Konstantin Raudova later reached out to him, and he is the individual who actually came up with the term EVP, electronic voice phenomena. And again, he never explained why ghosts are able to talk on magnetic tape. There's no explanation behind it, and he never, to my knowledge, that I've been able to read, tried to explain it. But that's where it comes from a lady who was just trying to get birds on her recorder, which I respect, because I'm a big bird guy. Not big bird, that sounds strange. I mean, it's big birds all right. I'm a big bird guy as well, yeah. But you will find that, unfortunately, when it comes to the paranormal, this is common. You'll hear statements like, it's been said, or some say, or I don't know where it comes from, but everybody else does it. No one knows why they do the things that they do. And Konstantin Raudova, this guy I think he's a doctor. He has got a lot of education. He's a smart human being, extremely smart. I think he was actually a regular psychologist prior to being a parapsychologist. But even he falls prey to the idea that if I want to believe in something, I can find all the evidence that I need. And so, just wanted to point him out. You won't hear, his name is not Fox Sisters. Konstantin Raudova, you will not hear his name very often, but this guy influenced modern paranormal investigation, in my opinion, more than anybody. But yeah, I wanted to talk about today's paranormal researchers, and again, this is my categorization. In no way is this official, and in no way did everybody fit into these 4 categories. I am just making stuff up. I'm not making stuff up. It's based on my observations. But it's, please don't think there's anything official about this. This is just my observations of being in the field for so long. And also, if you know anyone that is an investigator, they don't necessarily fit into this mold. So I'm not trying to generalize or stereotype in any way. Yeah, if you want to go next. That is Mr. Zach Baggins. I have a love-hate relationship with Zach Baggins. I just do not like him as a human being, but I love him at the same time because he makes me laugh. But Zach Baggins is from Ghost Adventures, you may have seen on TV. Ghost Adventures is the most popular TV show, I think. Do not source me on that. But I believe that Ghost Adventures is the most popular TV show on the air. And I tend to call, as much as people don't want to admit it, and a lot of ghost hunters would probably be very mad at me, so hope we aren't recording this. But he is kind of the genesis of what I call the experience seekers or anomaly hunters. And this is honestly, if I had to make up a percentage, I would say 95% plus of what ghost hunters are today. If you meet someone that says, I'm a paranormal investigator, they're probably this kind of paranormal investigator. Like I said, Zach popularized this style from Ghost Adventures. And also, if you ever hear certain people like Kenny Biddle or any kind of skeptics that talks about, and they say, I don't want, like I'm not talking about ghost hunters, these are ghost hunters to a lot of skeptics. So if you ever hear that vernacular, this is the kind of person that skeptics typically are talking about, as opposed to more grounded and objective paranormal researchers. But these guys are all about subjective experiences. They go to locations and they're really looking to experience something. They go with gadgets. There are all, like untold amount of different paranormal gadgets used to have blinky lights that supposedly ghosts are making them go off. If you ever watch Ghost Adventures, which I don't recommend, I actually recommend not watching it if you like your brain. But if you do, these guys use all sorts of gadgets and no one asks questions about why they're using them. No one asks questions about how they work. They just assume that if something goes off, there must be a ghost. These kinds of people, and I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with this. Like if you're just wanting to go as like a haunted place and have a good time and have experiences, I think that's great. I love doing that too. It's a lot of fun. One time in your life, go sit in a supposedly haunted place. Crazy fun. It is. There's something about it that I have done untold amount of times. It's just cool to be in an old historical location when a ghost just might walk around the corner. It's awesome. However, that's different between actually stating objective truth, because objective truth affects all of us in here, right? Like if I said I had an experience, therefore ghosts are real, that impacts your reality too. And that very much is where the problem lies with these guys. They often will have a subjective experience, and then they will apply that subjective experience to objective reality. I think what people don't understand in this group, because they're so focused on their own point of view, is like I take paranormal research very seriously. What I mean by that is if ghosts were ever actually discovered and proven to be true, we would prove that some kind of afterlife probably exists. I mean, we're rewriting like physics laws, right? Like this is a crazy good discovery, like an amazing discovery that reshapes fundamentally how human beings act and what we know about our experience. I mean, science is revolutionized. If you discover a ghost, you're up there with Einstein. Like it's a huge deal. It's not small. So when we have that much weight on such a claim, which I hope one day it happens, I think that would be awesome. I'm all for that. I would like to live forever. I don't want to die. I would love to live forever as a ghost, learning new stuff. That would be awesome. Like I want to see what happens, like when I pass on. Like I want to be here for that. So I'm really hoping that hopefully one day we could figure it out. I don't think we will, but I'm open to it. But when these guys make claims, especially like on TV, that they're making a claim that fundamentally would change human history. And when you have the weight of that and they show you a picture of some orbs, which is just backscatter from light, and they're claiming, they're saying I'm as good as Einstein. Look, I found a ghost. You kind of understand why there's just, I don't think they're intending to, but there's so much dishonesty, intellectual dishonesty with these kinds of people. And not ghost hunters in general, but specifically Zach Baggins. But unfortunately, the majority of the ghost hunting field goes to these places just to have experiences. And if you show up to a place and you want it to be haunted, it's going to be haunted. You're going to see crazy stuff. It's not necessarily real, but your brain will find a way to make it happen. That's what happened to me. I'm sure you have like untold stories of other people happening, but one of the stories I remember is I was sitting in an abandoned hospital, Old South Pittsburgh Hospital, and there was a team that came running in, and they said, "Did you see the shadow demon that just ran through here?" No, I did. Well, he must have gone that way, and they just kept chasing it.
What was he wearing?
I'm sure like all black shirts. That's what ghost hunters wear. The shadow demon, I mean, who knows what it was wearing, a shadow cloak or something. In that same investigation, we were walking down a hall, and this guy just stopped, and he was like, yeah, I was like walking by a door, and this demon just stepped out and stood in the door and just walked on, just nonchalantly like, yeah, totally fine. And it's just,
happens every day.
right. And unfortunately, like, I'm not saying that all ghost hunters are like that, but they're on a spectrum. Many people will sit around just like the old-time Fox sisters, and they will feel all sorts of stuff. Look, man, when you're in a prison that's falling apart and has had some of the worst human beings in history, like that have lived there, all sorts of just oppression and other things that have gone on. I'm sure even the prisoners were also subject to abuse from the guards. I mean, it's just a horrible situation to be in. Like, the weight of reality can be heavy, and that can make you think of all sorts of crazy things when you're in there. And so if you're going to want to find an experience, you will find one. That's the majority of ghost hunters. This is what I call the pseudoscientific field researchers. This is really popularized, and I know this is confusing, but I didn't name the show, so I'm sorry. But this is popularized by the TV show Ghost Hunters. At least the first couple of seasons, these guys are much better. They don't just do stuff on experience. They at least try to have some kind of objectivity, but there's still some problems with this. They still do pseudoscientific investigations. They'll sit around and ask questions to ghosts and hope they respond. But then if something happens, that's when science kicks in and they try to disprove what happened. I'm just kind of like, why didn't you use science in the first place? Like, why are we using science to disprove the pseudoscience? And so it kind of creates this vortex of you show up at locations, weird stuff happens, now we have to debunk it and disprove it. But you're creating your own problems at that point. And that's what happens a lot of times on ghost hunters. This is the very rare ghost hunter group. There's not a lot of these out there. There are certainly some teams who really try their hardest to use science. And I commend them for that. Like, use science as much as you can. But I still, like I said, I think the main problem with these guys is they try to disprove the things that they're creating their own problems.
They're assuming it's true unless they can debunk it?
No, and so that's the interesting thing with these guys. Well, I shouldn't say no. Some, yes. That's the interesting thing with these guys, and I want to get into this later, but they kind of live in a post-truth world where they don't ever make any claims. There's actually a team I'm thinking of in particular where if you like ask them, like, have you ever had any hauntings or anything? No, like, we've never discovered anything. But then they can tell you for like 3 hours about all the weird stuff that's happened. They don't make any truth claims. Like, there's just nothing. And it's very interesting because I'm like, well, what are you accomplishing? Like, if you aren't able to make any kind of truth claim, what are you doing? And that's kind of my point, because they get into this cycle of disproving their own stuff instead of trying to find the truth about a particular claim. So that's a good question.
Sometimes they diagnose toilet problems.
That's true. That's true. That is very true. They are
You have to
great.
keep your audience entertained and coming back.
And that's the problem.
That's the main thing.
And that's
They
what
have
happened.
incentive.
That's what happened to this show. It was a decent show. They did a really good job of where they would see strange things and they would actually talk about, like, first couple of seasons, I don't think once they said anything was actually haunted. Yeah.
Then the ratings went down.
And then the ratings
Checks
went down, and
Okay, we gotta change.
exactly, yeah. And they kind of turned into the Ghost Adventure style. Kenny Biddle, I don't know, I'm sure some of you in here know him, has actually developed a really good relationship with Jason. And Jason's, now he doesn't have, as many TV contracts and things. Jason's starting to come around a little bit. Still definitely in this camp, but he's definitely not as, I would say, extreme as he was getting there at the end of some of his TV series. So definitely, Kenny's working on him. We'll see where he goes.
And for these guys, are they becoming extreme because they believe it, or because they want the paycheck?
That's a good question too. I have no doubt that money plays a factor, but I would hate to besmirch what I don't know. Like, I don't want to say that they're doing this just for the paycheck, because I don't know them.
Understood.
I suspect, based on how seasons continue to get crazier and crazier and crazier, that certainly plays a part of it. But how much are they in control of that? How much is it the producers doing stuff? How much of it is just Hollywood magic? That I don't know. So I would hate to, unless if I know there's fraud, I don't want to call someone a fraudster. I try to give people benefit of the doubt. This I won't touch on very much because I'm not as familiar with it. But I call these the pseudoscientific lab researchers. There's a few still left, but these are really the parapsychologists. You would be surprised, and again, if you're interested in the paranormal at all, there actually are some skeptics who like parapsychology, and I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. But they haven't really left J.B. Rhine's kind of original standing point, where still they do a really good job of disproving stuff they don't want to believe. Great at that. If there's like a particular ghost claim, call these guys. If they don't want it to be real, man, they use science. They get all over it. They can disprove it. They do a great job. When you start to bring in stuff where a particular parapsychologist wants to believe in something, such as like ESP or something like that, all of a sudden they dismiss some of the things that go against their claims, and they just can find evidence out the wazoo that their particular claim is just the greatest thing ever. So unfortunately, I have to write most parapsychologists off. I've had a few conversations with Lloyd Auerbach, and so has Kenny Biddle, and he seems okay from what we can tell. Like, he seems pretty skeptical about things, but just often, again, belief without evidence still is a minor characteristics of parapsychologists. And unfortunately with science, it's you either are doing science or you're not doing science. There's nothing in between. And so for me personally, my viewpoint with most parapsychologists is I do have to kind of put them in the non-scientific camp. 1% of pseudoscience, unfortunately, you may as well be 100% in terms of finding truth. And then unfortunately, we have this next one. I just had to put Kenny up here. I'm a good friend with Kenny, so I like to make fun of him. But this is Kenny Biddle. These are the science-based researchers. Very, very rare that you will find these guys. These are the human beings that are after, like they are my people. These are, Kenny works for the Center for Inquiry. These are the skeptics of the paranormal world. I have very little written about it because they use science. They intentionally try to solve mysteries. They go after claims. They don't research a place. They try to pick things that are falsifiable. Can this be proven, disproven? And they try to disprove it. They go in with an open mind. Kenny does a great job. When I first got to know Kenny, he was a jerk. I know he still kind of is, but he was really a jerk back in the day. And he would start off debunking stuff. Like, he wouldn't listen to people, hear people out. But Kenny does a great job now of hearing people out, listening to their claim, and then working from there. As you can probably imagine, he has never found any evidence of the paranormal, but he keeps an open mind and he uses science to try to solve mysteries. And if he can't solve a mystery, he says he doesn't know what it is. It's a ghost. So it is a really good job of using science to solve mysteries, and he actually arrives at truth. So.
Do you know his origin
I have known Kenny for over a decade. I've known him for over a decade, and I don't know it, and he won't tell me either.
It's because he was the ghost.
That's really
During
funny.
the ghost hunt, he was the ghost that other people saw.
That's funny.
And that kind of made him think, like, well, how could somebody mistake me for being the specter that they saw out in the woods?
That's funny.
And it kind of led him to thinking that I need to be more scientifically literate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need more people like this. Like, we need people who are willing to engage with people who don't necessarily have the same beliefs that they do, but to teach critical thinking. That's what we need. Kenny is doing a great job. Yeah, I wish there was more people like Kenny. So I just kind of wanted to get into like what an investigation looks like. Every investigation is different. Every team you go with is different. Everyone has a different opinion. So I kind of wanted to do, again, like a general analysis of two kinds of investigations. First is, your typical pseudoscientific investigation. Very little research beforehand. Let's just say they want to investigate a prison. They may spend like an hour or so. It really depends. Some teams are better about this. Some teams will go on Facebook or YouTube and that's their research and they'll find out about a place. A lot of teams want to go in blind. I used to actually want to do this. Like, I want to go in blind, so if anything happens, I can read about it later and I can be objective. And then I realized that I would just, like, I would fit whatever I had happened to me into whatever I read later. So it wasn't working either way. But there's a lot of teams that just don't want to do research. They think that improves their investigation. And this doesn't happen very often, but some teams will walk around and establish a baseline, and I put that in quotes because there's no way you can establish a baseline in just an hour for a location. Not possible. You have a baseline for what happens, I guess, in that hour, but you don't know the place. You can't just walk around for a few minutes and you've got a baseline. I have never understood this, even when I was a believer, but investigations, they start at nighttime. Not always the case. Sometimes investigators will spend the night, and so sometimes they'll do daytime investigations. Super rare. Most investigations start at nighttime. Unfortunately, that's also just the industry. When people let you rent out a place to investigate, it's for nighttime. Why? I don't know. I've never figured it out. There's all sorts of legends that ghosts occur at nighttime. Interestingly, there was a study in the UK done, I think about 10 years ago, and at least in the United Kingdom, and I don't know how scientific the study was, but at least in the United Kingdom, the majority of paranormal sightings occurred like around lunchtime. It's like smack dab in the middle of the day. And that makes sense because that's when we're awake walking around. Also, Nick knows I hate this so much, but investigators will turn the lights off and then pull their flashlights out, which I don't. I have hated that for so long. Even when I was on the Ghost Guild, I would just start groaning. And they finally started doing investigations with their lights on, which I appreciated. But I don't get it. I've heard explanations, and none of them make sense to me. They say like it improves part of your, like some senses will be improved. But I'm like, our eyes are our best sense, so why are we? I don't get it. If you have an answer, let me know. Often we'll do kind of those Fox sisters. So this is why I wanted to talk about history, because you can kind of start to see where some of this stuff comes from. And remember, a lot of it is rooted in fraud or just made up, and it was disproven later. This is where we start to get into EVP sessions. That's kind of like question answer sessions. Typically an investigator will put microphones up and they'll ask questions. Is anybody here? Can you make a knock? What's the question you always ask? The Nikkei index. Nonsense questions. All sorts of questions are asked during EVP sessions in hopes of getting a response to a question. As you can imagine, when someone asks a question, you're going to get primed to hear an answer for an EVP session. It just happens. Something else called a spirit box, which is an outstanding band, but it's also a device which goes back into kind of what Konstantin Radova was doing with audio. Spirit boxes scan FM AM stations, and they're hoping to capture a ghost voice. If you're scanning FM and AM stations where people are talking or commercials or singing, you're going to hear some kind of voice. This is kind of the new hotness right now, called Estes sessions, or using the Estes method. And I appreciate, again, people are trying to become more scientific, but more scientific is still not scientific, and it still falls short of being able to collect objective truth. Estes methods are where an individual will put on a headset, they'll listen to something similar to a spirit box where it's just sweeping through FM and AM stations, and somebody else will ask questions to the spirits in the room. So the person with the headset on can't hear what's being asked. And so, but they'll say, like, if they hear a spirit talk in the headset, they will answer. So they can't hear the questions, and they believe that this kind of separates, some of the confirmation bias. But it doesn't, because later you have to review everything that you saw, and then that's when the confirmation bias kicks in. Because I've done these several times, and everybody else can hear the questions that you're asking, and they find all sorts of explanations, and they can often influence you when they kind of come up with their own ideas of what they were hearing. So I applaud the attempt, but unfortunately it falls way short. In my opinion, I would rather you do this, the EVP sessions, than do the Estes sessions, because at least you're not fooling yourself into thinking you're doing science, or thinking that you're being unbiased. And that's what's so dangerous. The closer you get to science, it can actually become more dangerous, because you can trick yourself into thinking, I'm being objective, when you're not. There's kind of a rise of the use of iPhone gadgets and Android apps. I was a cell phone technician for a while, and I don't really understand how these apps work, and the authors aren't telling you. But a lot of people walk around with phone apps to detect ghosts. There's something called the Ovilus. It's this device that has a bank of words, and the words just randomly go off. And again, as you ask questions, hopefully a word will show up that answers the question you were asking. Most researchers, they don't count the misses, they'll only count the hits. So if you ask, is anyone here with me, potato, they don't disregard that. And so when you do ask something, inevitably at some point, something is going to line up with what you ask. Isn't that correct? Yes, she answered for me. Thank you. You answered the question. You answered the question. Thank you. But inevitably, as you ask questions, you are going to find something at some point where the Ovilus is going to show up that makes sense. And also, I've never understood, like, how much time do you have to give? Like, if something answers 30 seconds later, is that within the amount of time for the ghost to answer? It often is to investigators. EMF detectors, we have used these since day one, and I've never heard a good explanation for why. I've never heard an explanation for, besides, well, ghosts are said to emit EMF. Why? I've never heard a great explanation for why that is. An electromagnetic field, yep, detector. A lot of people will use what's called a single field detector. I am not an electronic guy, but from my understanding, those are extremely inaccurate. A field is a three-dimensional field. And so the single field can only get one field at a time. So you kind of have to do math to get the full field, the full three-dimensional field. And most people who actually use these for their daytime job use what's called tri-field detectors. That way they don't have to do all the math. But ghost hunters don't realize that, often use the cheaper single field, or getting readings that just unfortunately are meaningless because they don't have the full field. They have one dimension of the field. It'd be like measuring a room, but only measuring the length. Like, that's not very helpful to determine how big the room is. And if it's a big number, well, what if it's just a long room, but a skinny room that doesn't have a lot of volume? So, but again, why do ghosts emit EMF? I don't know. There's a prevailing theory that high electromagnetic fields may cause sensations, hallucinations. Interestingly, I have never actually read good evidence that that's true. I know it was something I believed for a long time, because we would start using EMF detectors to disprove ghosts. But I need to do more research into that. A lot of teams will use laser grids to capture those crossing flying demons that I supposedly saw, but I didn't. There's another thing called REM pods. These are little devices, you may have seen them on TV shows, where you place down on the ground, and if you walk close to them, they'll start to go off. And they say that ghosts can approach these, and if they're going off, or it must be a ghost that's setting these off. You can set these off with your cell phone. You can set these off with a walkie-talkie. Earth's electromagnetic field itself can set these things off. But because they are seeking evidence, a lot of teams will interpret this as, well, I did ask a ghost to come towards the REM pod, and the REM pod went off. Must be a ghost. And unfortunately, that's not how logic works. Some teams, not every team, but some teams will use mediumship or psychic empathy. What that is some people believe that they can talk with ghosts using their psychic skills. I have never claimed to be a medium or understood how it works, so I've never really got what they're seeing. I don't know if they're seeing an image in their head. I don't know if they're hearing voices. The only person I've ever worked closely with is a counselor, a psychiatric counselor who claimed to be a medium. It always really bothered me. If you're working with other people who are also hearing voices, it's just for two reasons. One, is there something going on with you, and I hope there's not. But two, I really hope that they're not encouraging other people to hear these things, especially if they're working in counseling. The second kind is psychic empathy. These are people who get they have a feeling of, they feel like they can feel the spirits in the room, or they have a certain feeling about the place they're at. And I guess that means there's ghosts. Again, I've never, even in my most believer, oh, that's proper grammar, believer days, I don't know. But when I was just the opposite of skeptic, I never understood either of these, but I guess I'm also not a medium or a psychic. And then, like we were talking about before, some groups will attempt to debunk their own stuff. Very rare. It doesn't happen very often, and I do applaud those that do. It's kind of a lesson, or a lesson of futility. They're debunking the stuff that they discovered using all of this. And how much, if you keep debunking your stuff, at what point are you like, well, maybe this stuff doesn't work? And that's where I arrived at, and I hope more people maybe one day will. Well, these are some of the devices. This is one of the most popular EMF meters. It's called a K2. You can literally put a magnet on the back of it and push the magnet in, it'll make the K2 go off. So if you ever see these on TV shows, these are easily manipulated to go off. This is what the REM pods look like. And this is an example of a spirit box. That's the thing that sweeps the FM and AM channels. And not every team uses these, just to say. And then there's an actual scientific paranormal investigations. These tend to investigate claims. So if someone had something happen to them, if someone saw something at 12 o'clock on a Sunday, the team would not show up at 12 a.m. and turn all the lights off and do an EVP session, right? It doesn't make sense. If you went to your doctor and said, hey, I'm having pain in my chest, I feel like you'd have some questions if they turned the lights off and then started listening to your ears or something. You're like, well, what does that have to do with my chest? But that's what a lot of the pseudoscientific teams do. They get a pattern of doing things, whereas scientific paranormal investigation instead changes their investigation based on the claim. Nick and I had an experience of doing I convinced Nelson, who's the leader of the Ghost Guild, to do a scientific investigation. One of the most fun I've ever had. It was a blast, but we went to Virginia. It was a private home. Yeah, Danville. It was a private home we did, which do not ever investigate private homes, please. But in this case, Nelson knew the person, so there was no mental illness or anything a part of that. But we went to the private home, and they had several claims. They had a claim that near the door, there was a cat toy. Or no, not a cat toy. It was something about the doorstop. It had one of those things where if you crossed in front of it.
Motion activated.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what it was, that phone. It was a Halloween phone. And if you walked by, it'd be like, brrr, and it would make this scary noise. And she was afraid to remove it because it was going off on its own. And she just thought the spirits liked the phone. And so, or there's something about it. She did not want to remove the phone. So we went in, and there was all sorts of other, I'm just going to tell this one story for the sake of time. There was multiple claims that we researched that day. But she said it happened during the day. So we showed up during the daytime. It was so nice. I was so happy to do an investigation where I could see stuff. So we showed up, and it took us a long time to figure this out. I thought it was the battery at some point. I thought it was the cat walking in front of it because they had cats everywhere. But everything that we tried, we came up with hypotheses before. I researched the model of the phone. I tried to see if anyone else had any problems on Amazon or anything else like that. Nothing that I could find, but most of the investigation took place before I actually showed up at the location. None of my investigation paid off though, but that's typical of actual scientific investigation. Most of the stuff happens before you show up at the location, if you even have to show up at the location. A lot of times you don't. But we showed up. We could not figure out what was making this phone go off. I think it even actually went off a couple of times on its own. You're sitting there like, what the heck is setting this phone off? Very curious situation. And then at some point, I think it was you that were outside. Nelson and I were sitting just trying to figure out this phone. Then all of a sudden it went off. Right as Nick was walking by, like the door, but like way far away from the door. I told Nick to like walk back towards the door again. So he walked back, and every time he crossed, that laser, it said it only had like a 3-foot range, but this laser, I mean, how many feet away? Like
probably a good 40 feet.
Yeah, was him walking through glass was setting that phone off. And she just so happened had construction workers next door that were passing back and forth all day long, and that's what was setting the phone off. I know many of you are sitting here like, this is a stupid story. It's about a phone going off. Like, what is the point of investigating this? And that's because the person sincerely was scared to live in their home, right? And it may sound dumb on the grand scheme of things, but in terms of like helping someone realize that, hey man, there's probably not ghosts setting your phone off, hopefully that had some kind of impact on her to make her think more critically. And there were other things that we investigated. We didn't have all the answers to some of them, and I wish we could go back, because I'd like to figure out some of them, but there was a lot of stuff we found out. It could show her like, hey, probably not ghosts, probably just the workers next door. So that's scientific paranormal investigation, and I'm telling you, this stuff is a blast. If you ever have an opportunity to do it, it's so much fun. It's like a escape room, but like real life. Like you actually are trying to solve mysteries. I'll tell you one more. There was another time, and I wish I had the clip, but I don't. I was showing a new team member basically these two kinds of investigation, because I was really trying to spread skepticism in the Ghost Guild. It was a brand new team member, and they were letting me show her how to investigate. And I was showing her how, to do what I consider a proper investigation, but I also wanted to be fair and show what a pseudo-scientific investigation looked like. We were at Mordecai, and there's right down the road, Mordecai Manor, and there's a chapel at Mordecai. I was like, all right, we're gonna turn the lights out, we're gonna go into the chapel, we're gonna sit around and ask questions, and it's gonna be dumb and boring. But as we were sitting there, and I forgot what question I asked, I think I said, can you show us a sign of your presence? I kid you not, what sounded like monk chants coming from the center of the chapel just went off. And it was like, oh. And I was just sitting there, and I was like, I swear, the point of this was to show you this stuff is dumb. But that was wild. And my first initial, because it was right next to a road. So me, I'm sitting there probably someone's radio. But as part of scientific paranormal investigation, you do need to suspend your beliefs. That's part of investigation. So we stepped away, kind of thought through, let's think about what this could have been. And then we later tried to replicate it, which was some of the most fun I've ever had. But this took us months to figure out, this chapel. You would think it was just a car, but every time we tried to replicate the car, that's not what it was. We were standing out there, listening to the cars pass the chapel. Some would have just blaring radios. None of it was coming through the chapel. We had Nelson walk around blaring on his phone and talking, because it was a public park. So we were like, oh, maybe someone's just walking around. Nothing sounded like it. And then it took us months, and then we finally went back. I know also we go back to locations to investigate. Doesn't happen very often. Most teams will go to investigation once, and they'll be like, it's haunted, and never go back. But I wanted to crack this case, and so we had Nick. Actually, do you want to tell your story about how you drove around? We had the whole team get into the chapel, and we were like, we're going to sit here, we're going to figure this out.
It's 12 o'clock at night in this little neighborhood, and I have a convertible, and I had Gregorian chant music, full blast, and just cruising through this neighborhood. And people were walking by looking at me. I'm just like, hi, I love some Gregorian chant.
And we couldn't hear anything when it was.
It's actually way creepier if you told them what you were doing.
Sure.
We're looking for ghosts, yeah.
But as he was blasting and stuff, we couldn't hear it in the chapel. And when we did hear it, it wasn't right. It sounded like it was coming from outside, not inside. Like, go ahead.
That was it.
Oh, well, eventually he got to, we were about to give up, I think. And I think you got to a stop sign.
Oh yeah, that's right. I stopped at the stop sign, and then you guys could hear it.
For whatever reason, kind of far away from the chapel, even right next to the chapel, we couldn't hear it. But far away at a stop sign, something about how the sound traveled made his Gregorian chants appear right in the middle of the chapel. Wild. It was so cool. It's so much fun. And there was a person there that day who was like, I felt something, like when that happened. Like that was nice. And so it's nice to show, and again, I know you're sitting there like, this is silly, this is kind of, what are you accomplishing with your life? You just found out a car made a sound at a chapel. For me, not that big of a deal. I mean, yeah, it was a lot of fun, but for someone who was there, she specifically said, like, I felt something when I did that. And that impacted her life, and hopefully it kind of left a mark of, I need to do critical thinking moving forward. I'm gonna try to burn through these, because this is probably the most important part, so I will slow down a little here, and if I can't get through the rest, then I hope you walk away with at least this. And that's why? Like, why do we need skeptical people talking to a bunch of people that believe in ghosts? I'm glad you asked. And there's many reasons that people believe. There's a lot of psychological influence, like I talked about before. When I went to the prison, there was just a lot of pressure to find something. I mean, you spend so much money, time, your own belief systems are a part of this. I wanted to believe there was an afterlife. I mean, there's a lot of pressure to see stuff. Like there's a whole lot of expectation to, man, everybody else is seeing a ghost, why am I not seeing a ghost? I've read all these stories about ghosts, where are they at? So there's a whole lot of pressure to actually see stuff, and often that will cause you to see stuff. I saw something that wasn't actually there. Kind of crazy. But we really need people to teach others just critical thinking skills. I'll try not to get too much into politics, but we don't do a good job of teaching kids nowadays critical thinking. I think it's something we definitely lack, and this is something that we need more of in our society. And I'm going to share some ways of how you can support that later on in the talk, in the 6 minutes that I have now. So again, I'm going to try to burn through this, but this is where it kind of gets a little bit heavy. It's like fall over. But why do people believe? For the most part, I think a lot of people cannot separate their beliefs from their identity for who they are. And that's a big problem. I think skeptics even have this problem sometimes. But sometimes our beliefs become so ingrained, it becomes who we are, but we are not our beliefs. Dr. Dad, who is a great skeptic, said something that really sat with me. But we are the judges of our beliefs. Our beliefs don't determine who we are as human beings. And I think as skeptics, we, for the most part, get that. But most people in the world just don't. Critical thinking is not taught. But a lot of people identify, like they are ghost hunters. It's part of their lifestyle. And if you start to talk about why, or maybe even ask questions about that, people can get really spiky. Because if you remove that, what's left? It's something I had to deal with several times in my life when you have to remove a belief, like what's left over, and it's hard. One of the things that happens in the paranormal world is there is just a lack of any kind of truth. You will hear a conversation where someone will talk about spirits are entities of dead people, and then the other person will be like, well, no, I think they're like a tulpa, and I won't get into what all those mean, but they'll sit there and be like, oh, yeah, that's an interesting theory, but as soon as you walk up and say, well, I don't think spirits are real, they will both look at you and turn on you and collectively disagree with you. So as long as you're agreeing with something about the paranormal world, they're down. Like truth is so malleable within the paranormal community until you challenge that truth, and all of a sudden they're against you. Another aspect that you see is the foregoing of consistency. I cannot tell you how many times I have heard just multiple different stories from the same person about an experience. And to them, that's okay. They're totally fine with inconsistency and incongruent thoughts. Another huge problem just with our society in general, and I even think with skeptics also, I think it's a problem with everybody, myself included. Like, I'm not pointing the finger at anyone, that I'm not pointing back at myself. But echo chambers occur and tribalism occurs. Believers will kind of get into these groups and all they hear and all they talk about is paranormal stuff. And they show pictures and it becomes their life. And so they think that everybody is experiencing the paranormal because that's all they know. They block off, and they block skeptics, they block science-based things, and it becomes who they are. I think, like I said, I think it's the problem with skeptics also. I think we could also enter our own echo chambers. But I really encourage people to break through any kind of echo chamber you have. I'll give you an example. There was a particular subset of people who left X and Twitter. We need people to go towards Twitter. We need skeptics to break through these echo chambers because there are conspiracy theories online and they're not going to get better with just leaving them alone. They're going to get worse. I've seen it in the paranormal. Fraud and people taking advantage of each other occurs when a bunch of believers get together and they just lack any kind of critical thinking. It takes someone who has critical thinking to encourage critical thinking to save some of these people. And we really are saving people from wasting money and fraudulent activities. There's people who buy equipment, they have no idea how it works. It costs hundreds of dollars. And some of these people, unfortunately, can't afford it, but they buy it anyways because they're chasing ghosts. There's another thing called motivational internality. This is people tend to only be motivated by what they're already motivated by. I'm gonna skip that because it's long and complex. And the last point of that was, there's a lot of people who may have mental health issues and other issues that I hope they get help for and they'll blame on paranormal things. But we need people who are able to talk critically to those kind of people and encourage them to get help they need or just to break them out of bad spiraling thoughts. But how can skeptics get involved? I kind of have 3 different ways, depending on how you want to. I would encourage you to at least do a small way, and that's in supporting critical thinking groups. Those include Committee of Skeptical Inquiry. If you do not subscribe to Skeptical Inquirer, highly recommend it. Just supporting them by getting their magazine or just watching these guys actually really helps the way YouTube works. Kenny Biddle, like I've said before, excellent resource. There's another resource called Thinking is Power. This is Melanie Tresick King. She's trying to bring critical thinking back to schools. If you support anyone, if there's anything you can do, just watch her stuff. Just watching her stuff helps her. But this is, I think, the most important thing. I'd recommend you break out of your own echo chamber. And it may be hard. I think safe spaces are important, but break out of your echo chamber and just have conversations with people. Be polite, be respectful, but to get critical thinking out, like, we have got to go to them. They are not going to come to us. And if you're really interested, you can look up something called street epistemology. Just a quick Google search will teach you how to talk with that. But really getting involved with people, really joining their groups and loving on them and getting to know them, listening to their wants, listening to their needs, rubbing elbows. I mean, this is how you're going to really start to change people's minds, introduce critical thinking. But that's it.
We've got 15 minutes for questions.
Sure.
So, here, funny question. Imagine somebody like you reliably knows how to generate a ghost experience. You know,
Say that again?
Somebody like you knows how to reliably generate a subjective experience of ghosts. You know how to go out feeling for ghosts, look for them, and have like an experience, right? Mm-hmm. And I know that too. But why ghosts? Like, if it's our brain creating things, why spirits and shadows and white mist things and orbs? Because, like, for example, like, I would go hiking in Florida a lot, and I'm very scared of dogs, and a lot of people are not good dog owners. I'm more scared of dogs than coyotes. In the 4-mile walk I do, like 3 or 4 days a week, I had numerous run-ins with coyotes, and that's fine, right? But I'm always scared and paranoid of people's dogs, right? And so I'm walking at 1 o'clock in the morning through neighborhoods. My senses opened up, looking for dogs. Now, I might have a subjective experience of a spirit because that's the kind of person I am, right?
Sure.
But never will I see a dog that's not there. My brain will never generate a dog, even though that's what I'm most interested in and most scared of.
Yeah.
So why orbs and shadows and spirits, which I'm not even afraid of, and not like a dog, which I'm most highly interested in and know is real?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a great question. One of the things I will say is, one, how human beings have perceived spirits have changed over the years. How a Greco-Roman person saw spirits was completely different to our current view of spirits today. Even Victorian times, spirits looked different. You'd often have accounts of spirits with chains and things of that nature. But as time has moved on, our modern day idea of spirits has changed. And so what's interesting to me...
Sorry, it's not so much like why the spirits changed, but like why is it that it's a spirit that we see?
Yeah.
Why doesn't our brain make other things that you would expect to see? Like why doesn't my brain make a dog, or does it make like a mailman?
Yeah.
You know, specifically, why is it a ghost that looks like a ghost?
Yeah, and like, I think what I was
And I'm
getting
not
at...
necessarily looking for a ghost.
Yeah, I think what I was getting at is, whatever you're seeing, your brain is what's associating it to spirit, right? Sure. Are you actually seeing a spirit, or is your brain associating that, whatever you're seeing, to a spirit? And that's a question. And for you also, I don't know if that's like your personal experience. I know for me that does not happen to me. Like if I see things out of the corner of my eye, it's not typically spirits. And so it does sound like a subjective question. And unfortunately, subjective questions have subjective answers. And so...
How come people who see ghosts only see ghosts and do not see other things that aren't there so often? Why, I guess I'm saying is, why do we see ghosts, but we don't see dogs that aren't there? We don't see doors.
But some people
I might
do.
see a ghost in here, but I won't see a door on the wall.
Yeah, no, that's a great question too. Some people do see dogs, but why don't we see a pool stick on the wall? I am not qualified to fully answer this question, but from my understanding, our brains are primed. It's called pareidolia. We are primed to see just human face-shaped objects. You see a smiley, that's not a human face, but our brains interpret that as a human face. We're really good at seeing faces. And we're really good at seeing specifically human-shaped predators. Is that an evolutionary thing? I think so. Not qualified to fully answer your question. But from my understanding, that's just the way our brains are primed. Whether it be evolution, cultural byproduct, that I can't answer. But from my understanding, it's just that's just the way we're primed.
I guess
Right.
my thing is, if you know what a mailman is, and when you see something unexplained, your brain doesn't go to mailman because you know what a mailman is. So you never report seeing a mailman, right? But if you have an experience that you don't understand and your brain can't process because it doesn't have something for that, you go with something amorphous, whatever it is, which is a white ball or something like that, not something that you immediately know, because your brain will do this. Oftentimes, we'll see something that we think we know, we'll put that on there, that'll be our memory, and it's not that.
Correct.
Very simply, you walk down the street and you say, I saw a dog. It was a cat or it was a rabbit, but you thought it was a dog because you're used to seeing a dog in that yard.
And not just that, like, so sometimes when you're sleeping in the dark, and I've had this happen as I'm an adult, I've had things stacked up on a shelf before. I have physically had to get up and move it because my brain keeps telling me that is a human object up there. I know that ghosts don't exist, or I know that there's no creepy guy underneath my bed that's going to poltergeist me into the closet. But in order for me to be able to go to sleep, I have to move this so my brain stops trying to make sense of it. Because that's what's really happening, is your brain's going through a catalog of what could this be that I've seen and what do we already know. So when you're talking about Victorian ghosts, you know, Marley and Marley with their chains, they look a lot different than they do now because we are primed to see things a little bit differently. Like, and we all love to get scared. I mean, horror movies are the best things out there, but you know, and we want to get that thrill. And I know what I'm seeing is not real, but when I go to a haunted house and I know the person in front of me is just wearing makeup, I've pissed myself before I've gotten so scared. And I know it's not real. And we can't get, and that's kind of fun in a sense, I think, that we can't get over that, and we can't get past that, and that's still like a primal part of ourselves we can just kind of give into and let ourselves get scared.
Thank you for the question. Yeah.
I wanted to ask if there's a database of, because I assume that people have been debunking things. They're like things associated with sites that, like, oh, if you go to the Queen Mary, there's like knocking or whatever. So has there been a database where it's like, oh, this is because, and some engineer like chimes in on the acoustics causing this or that?
Great question. No, but I have a goal in my John Minkolet's Questions thing to build such a thing. So I do want to build some kind of like wiki or database for claims. But no, not that I'm aware of, and it's really unfortunate. Oh, Snopes is good. Yeah, there's a few like there's Snopes.
Wikipedia can be good. Yeah. Like there's I don't know. Here, I'm gonna give Coleman Watts a plug here because this was amazing. So we went to SciCon, and Kenny Biddle was actually involved with this project. One of GSOW, which they basically go to Wikipedia and edit articles to make
Guerrilla Skeptics.
Guerrilla Skeptics Wikipedia. And one of the researchers did the Winchester House. And I grew up my whole entire life believing that Sarah Winchester just kept building and building and building because of all the people that died from the Winchester rifle. Turns out that story's complete bullshit. And even the people that are running the house don't actually explain to you, oh, the door that goes to nowhere, that's actually because the part of the house fell off in an earthquake, and they just decided not to rebuild it. And so they did Coleman Watts, what's his? Think This Through, thank you. He did a wonderful sketch of where they had some ghost hunters, and I'm using that term nicely towards them, go to the Winchester house to do some investigation. And what was really cool is the video that Coleman did, they went through and had Kenny, like it was like consulting Kenny, like, hi, we're going to consult this person. And he explained a lot of what they were using in this to do their investigation and why this wasn't working. And I think it was the ovulus that you were talking about that just spits out words.
Yep.
And he explained what that was, and that this is one of the most primitive tools that you can use.
He was like, how does this work? It doesn't.
But it is a very well done, and I wish more people
unfortunately, and I wish there was just one place you could go that just breaks everything down. So I know what you're asking for about like a one source. Unfortunately, it's just spread all over the internet. Coleman Watts, Kenny Biddle, great sources of information for sure.
All right. Thanks, Faith. We've got time for one more question. Yeah. Abraham, I'm going to hand the microphone to you.
Sure, your right question and a recommendation. Please. Okay, question is, you said it's how we perceive what's around us to determine the ghost. Okay, have you ever done any work with totally blind people to see how they perceive paranormal activity?
I myself have not. I have heard that, I believe it was actually the Rhine has. But again, Ryan is not always objective, but I know there's been some research into that. I can't tell you how much, though.
Okay. And recommendation is, I know you guys meet at the Frontier. Down the road is Mez, and they have one of these spaces where you could have meetings with less interruptions.
Oh, yeah. That's a great idea, yeah. Okay. It helped me present next time, so I won't get so distracted.
Thank you, Abraham.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so that concludes our Q&A. John?
I had like one final quick thing.
Please.
That's okay.
Please,
oh God, battery's running low.
Oh
no. I forgot the questions. So we gotta ask more questions. But if you're interested in keeping up with me, this is kind of like my schedule of what's going on. On Friday, I'm doing a podcast with the Minnesota Association of Paranormal Study. I have no idea what we're going to talk about. I'm sure some ghost hunting stuff. I will be at the Trevette Clinic Parafest in Hamptonville. I'll be on some kind of panel hanging out with a bunch of ghost hunters there too. If you're there, I hear there's a Towel Day presentation.
There is. Triangle Skeptic Camp 2025 on May 24th and 25th of this year.
I hope to take part of that. Also, I will be at Con Carolinas in Charlotte. It seems like a really awesome like sci-fi festival. I will be there the entire time on all sorts of paranormal panels. So come check me out there if you're in Charlotte. And then there's 2 online presentations with the Rocky Mountain Atheists that I'm going to be doing in August and October too. I'm sure this will fill up more, but I'm just getting started. It's a QR code if you want to follow my social media nonsense. I'm just getting started, so there's not a lot yet. Or if you would prefer to scan my card, you can just scan the back of this if you would like, to follow like my Twitter, Facebook accounts and things like that. just had to plug myself.
Absolutely. We encourage plugs.
But that's it.
All right. John Michael, everybody. Thank you, John.
Thank you.